Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining today's Zoom. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jovi Nazarino. I am a learning science and education outreach specialist, part of the Open Learning Residential Education team. It is my pleasure today to announce today's talk, which is Some Assembly Required Creating with Students. And our special guest speaker is Ken Zolot. So Ken is a senior lecturer in brain and cognitive sciences and mechanical engineering at MIT. He is also professor of creative entrepreneurship at the Berklee College of Music and the founder of the Innovation Teams Initiative at MIT Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. So he is here with us today to share about his experience teaching this course 2177 called Designing Virtual Worlds, where AR/VR project co-creation and interactions with experts sort of all come together to support students. So very excited to hear from you, Ken, and I will hand things off to you.
Thank you, Jovi, and good afternoon, everybody. Given that the theme here is co-creating with students, I thought I would co-create this talk with a student as well, and you might see Mollie Johnson is on the Zoom. I'll introduce her in a few minutes. She's from Aero Astro, which is fitting if we're talking about extended reality and virtual reality, because most of us, when we think of virtual reality, as usual, science fiction and space travel figured this stuff out long ago. This is a scene from the famous Star Wars Jedi Council, where all these Jedi masters were sitting around in a room, only some of them were in the room and some of them were artificial projections being beamed in from around the world. And we're almost, 50 some years later, almost at a point where we're able to render that for co-creating classes together and co-attending meetings together. It wasn't just Star Wars. Star Trek had the infamous holodeck, where even though you're floating around in a spaceship in the middle of nowhere, you can ask the computer to generate some artificial world for you. And you walk in there, and it's as though you're really there. You hear the birds singing and the trees are brushing against you. We're getting closer to that reality as well. There are also some dystopian visions. I mean, there's a lot of talk now about the metaverse and AI and how soon we won't be able to tell computer-generated images from the real world. And we'll all be walking around these animated advertising adventures where we're bombarded with some real and some AI-generated images that we have to weave into our social playbook as to how we navigate our world. And there are some more specific useful implementations, such as people talking about how, the AI controlled metaverse will allow doctors to see inside our bodies and consult the world of knowledge about a certain condition they see going on with us. And there are hundreds of examples like this, which we invite our students to explore. The challenge is, you start with this dream on the left that we're going to build the Star Trek holodeck and we'll be able to create this artificial world. And you usually wind up with a really tedious software development project because the tools for creating these 3D graphics and making them really believable and really immersive, the tools are not well understood and they change so rapidly that it's really hard to build a curriculum around this or even to assume student prior knowledge. So that brings us to this exercise that Jovi asked me to talk about, which is this class we run where we purport to teach designing virtual worlds. And in reality, we are hosting a group of like-minded students who all want to teach each other how to do this based on brand new material that maybe just came out within weeks. One of my mottos when doing this, those of you who've been attending these xTalks long enough will remember our dearly beloved and departed colleague, Woody Flowers, who talked about the challenge of being a designer and working in uncertainty. And one of his favorite slogans for students who weren't comfortable improvising was, learn to make peace with the knot in your stomach. And that's sort of my motto as we co-create this curriculum with the students. The students, by the way, come from MIT, Harvard, and Berklee College of Music primarily. It's kind of three legs of the stool. We have a good sized population from each of those schools. And we also get one or two drop-ins from Mass Art and Wellesley College. And this exercise started as an answer to the question, how do I get Berklee musicians to better understand the tech economy and electronic content production and how to work with our innovation ecosystem around MIT? There are a number of us at MIT who have strong connections to music and in particular to Berklee College of Music. And so I was asked if I would help Berklee step up their game in technological innovation and electronic production and design and music production and engineering. So I thought, let's bring the Berklee kids over to MIT and have them sit with our MIT engineers and scientists and do fun stuff together. And I started brainstorming with some Berklee colleagues, what would be a fun thing to get Berklee kids and MIT kids to build together. Turns out there are a lot of video gamers at Berklee, and doing the soundtrack to video games, and even for feature-length movies, there's a whole film scoring major at Berklee, and now there's a screen scoring major of how you make these worlds sound believable. And as usual, I'm sure you've seen this 100 times from Alison King's transition from the teacher being a sage on the stage to a guide on the side. My role is really to guide the students and let them bring the knowledge. This isn't like a one-way data dump where I tell them the state of the art. It's really a co-creation exercise where many of them have done things that I haven't heard of yet, and they're teaching each other. And my job is kind of to facilitate this and try to energize people and make them happy with unknown outcomes. Make it clear that there's no right answer on the test, that their contributions will change the outcome of the semester. And as such, a lot of the emphasis is on simple daily tasks of being present. And as I said before, I thought the best way to demonstrate that was to give you exposure to a living human specimen. We have a live subject right here in Mollie Johnson. Mollie took the class about a year and a half ago and then went on to build something over IAP based on some of her work in Aero Astro. And Mollie, if you want to unmute and say hello, I have your first slide that describes the IAP offering.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Ken. A little bit more about me. So, like Ken mentioned, I'm an alumni of the class. I took it in the fall, my first semester here at MIT. So this was a very, very fun introduction to MIT as an institute and also the collaborative nature of being a student here. Um, what I wanted to get out of the course was learning how to do game design because my master's thesis work is focused on using augmented and virtual reality for teaching aerospace engineering concepts. However, I had no prior background in any of anything virtual worlds or VR, but taking the class was really helpful in introducing me to some of these very basic game design principles that I had no prior knowledge in. But of the materials and the people that I met through the class, I was able to create this 3-week course, as you can see here in the advertisement, that was on 3 different subjects within Aero Astro, which we presented in the January IAP term. So we exposed students to learning about aircraft, flying aircraft, learning about spacecraft, and experiencing the inside of the spacecraft.
And
And all
Mollie, I can advance through if you want. I don't know if you want to show some of your slides with the animations. Just prompt me when you're ready to go to the next slide.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, all of this pretty much spawned through the idea of how can we teach in a more immersive and a more interactive way than simply having students sit down and listen to a lecture. So I have a more recent example of simulations that were created specifically for AirAstro, in which we came up with a VR simulation on teaching students about the components of a rocket and the launch that goes and the flight dynamics that are behind a launch. So here's an example of one of the scenes where you can experience a Falcon 9 rocket at a 1-to-1 scale. Sometimes in the classroom, it's really difficult to kind of get a grasp for how large complex aerospace systems are, but it's something that we can translate pretty well into the VR environment. If you skip to the next slide, I think that might be another example. And we kind of teach this in a more interactive way in which we teach our students about the components of the rocket, and then they have to assemble it in the correct order so they can see how things interface with each other. And then finally, since many of us have never been to a real launch in real life, and actually, if you were this close to the rocket in real life, you probably wouldn't be you wouldn't be able to watch it safely. We replicated a launch simulation in virtual reality so that students could see how the dynamics works as the rocket launches. So in scenes that come after this, they analyze the flight profile, and it's about teaching while experiencing.
And it was amazing to watch Mollie go through this journey, by the way. And one of the reasons I thought to invite her is we coincidentally are now in discussions with Aero Astro about how to increase our curriculum around extended reality and simulations, and we might do an FPOP program for incoming first-year students where we immerse them in some VR. So we're going to start the co-creation even earlier than their coursework. So Mollie and I were just in a meeting with the Course 16 folks to work out some of these details, and it occurred to me that she would make a great role model for you folks as well. And summing this all up, the essential part of our syllabus, and this is really frustrating for me, because students love to digest the syllabus, and it's really hard to write down. And sometimes I use kind of flowery language, or I'll quote the Beatles even in calling this semester a magical mystery tour. It's really a very unfamiliar adventure for a lot of students, especially the ones who are accustomed to getting the right answer to help define a field that is emerging so quickly. So what we hope to do is really more on a human psychology level and a team building level, nurture the environment, kind of create the safe space where they can bring their ideas together. They can kind of find that flow state where they're extending the tools beyond what anyone's seen used before. And we'll collectively produce something that I couldn't have written as an assignment on the syllabus because I didn't know them yet. And another aspect of this is also just them making new friends and appreciating a new perspective on how we experience life and art and all experiences, and stretch their comfort zone about working in these alternate universes. There are some prognosticators who posit that humanity is on the cusp of a massive transformation where all of our computing is about to break out from behind these 2D pieces of glass. We're all staring at a screen right now. I don't appear to be sitting in your living room next to you or in your office or wherever you are. And there are many people, including Alvin Graylin, who's president of HTC, who's one of our partners and sponsors and has just put out a book about this, who thinks that we have no idea what's about to hit us as a species when all of this immersive technology unfolds. So with that grandiose prediction for what's to come, I'll maybe throw this to you to help co-create. What would you do if you had to teach this subject in September, which I am probably going to do in about 6 or 7 months? What will have changed between now and then? Will people even be wearing headsets, or will they have implantable brain chips that will create the illusions for them, or smart contact lenses? How do we select and reach out to students who will take this class? It's a new subject matter. It's kind of a weird elective that doesn't fulfill a GIR, and very few curriculum departments want this on their critical path because it's so unpredictable and new. So how do we find those students who are willing to do something improvisational? And who should we invite to be part of the community?
You talked about this idea of like, how do you create that safe space where folks, feel like they can explore, and it's a very different format from maybe many other classes students may be encountering. How do you sort of help shift the mindset, very early on in the class to get folks to feel like this is that space where they can do that? Or what are some of the things that you do that seems to work?
Yep. Lots of small assignments, lots of assignments where they're called upon to sort of perform on the spot. I ask them to write a couple sentences after every class where they summarize what they experienced in the class. And then I always open the next class by reading some of their writings and talking to the other students about whether they experienced it the same way. I assemble a class photo book where everyone submits a photo of themselves and a few sentences of what they hope to get out of the class, and we circulate that for all to see. We do rapid iterations with group teams where I quickly throw them in a group of strangers that they didn't yet work with and tell them to build a virtual experience within a week and come back and present it in class a week later. Then they throw it away and I put them in a different team and start over again. So kind of getting them very quickly into the mode of having to do things without enough time and without enough resources, but with new friends. And Molly, you experienced that firsthand, so I don't know if you want to share any of your early memories of what it was like to be in the class and build relationships with your fellow students.
Yeah, maybe to clarify, the whole class wasn't like that, but the very early portion of the class was very much like very rapid prototyping, brain dumping with people you've never worked before, and then kind of throwing out ideas and restarting from scratch. But then eventually, once you settle on one idea, then you kind of go with that and stick with that for the rest of the semester.
There are different, I guess, sort of guest speakers or other folks that you bring in to sort of present and share knowledge. And where does that come in, like in the structure of the course? Is that happening early on? Is it happening when folks have kind of settled on an idea that they're moving forward with, or how does that kind of play with this tactic of the rapid teaming and sort of getting folks used to the idea of creating quickly within constraints and also being okay with saying this idea doesn't go forward?
So we like to have a guest every week, and we do a 3 hour meeting once a week, and then that's followed with a 1 hour evening lab session once a week. It's actually 2 hours for the lab session. We just changed that. So during the 3 hour, when we all meet together, the guest speaker comes and talks only for about 20 minutes, and then we do an exercise with the guest. It's the way I like to do this. And many of these people are leaders from the VR industry or alum who've started VR companies or gone on to grad school where they're working in VR. So it's Friday afternoons are our 3 hour meetings. So we have guests Friday afternoons, and then all the students gather in what we call our cave. We have a room that's dimly lit with low ceilings that kind of feels like a VR environment that's filled with toys and hackers and mentors, which is our lab. And we hold lab sessions in there 2 nights a week where the students come in and do their assignments.
So actually, this IEP specifically was the second time that we ran the course. We did have a little bit lower student participation the second time around. But that also allowed us to do a more interactive, like discussion-based first half of the class. So the way that the course was set up over IP is that we would have a 3 hour class session twice a week, and the first hour is a lecture that provides context for what they're going to experience in the lab activity. The lab activity being 2 hours using virtual reality. So in the lecture portion, it was more of a discussion, like a back and forth between students and lecture than it was just a traditional lecture. But then the activity period was the 2 hours using the virtual reality headset. They had a worksheet to complete while doing the activities in the headset. So there was some goals that they had to achieve during the session, and then also for recollection, filling out that worksheet. But overall, it was pretty well received. We got student data back. I'm just kind of parsing through that this month and putting that in a paper. But overall, the students did say that they felt more motivated and interested in the subjects after taking the class.
They tend to fall into some predictable categories. I've taught a variation of this course for the past 7 years. So we started this well before Apple released their Vision Pro, even before these Meta Quest headsets were that popular. And as you pointed out, educational applications are important. As John was talking about with physics visualization, there are a number of applications where you're visualizing really complex or either very large or very small principles that it's hard to do in the 2D world we live in. So for visualization of complex science and concepts, there are some of what I call emotional health apps, whether it's psychotherapy in VR or exposure therapy to phobias or stage fright simulations where you put yourself in a situation that makes you nervous, sometimes while even wearing a biometric sensor that allows the software to determine just how nervous you are based on your heart rate or galvanic skin response. There are a bunch of art and entertainment ones, like a virtual art museum visit. We had a delightful one where a student could walk through a painting in a virtual world. And as they walk through this painting, they walk into the artist's studio, and then they can go further out the door of the artist's studio and go into the artist's home, and then go even further into an artist's dream. They watch the artist lie down and go to sleep, and then you could go inside their head and experience like this psychedelic dream that the artist had. So there's been some really fun explorations. And also building on what John talked about of some of these physics. John, you've probably seen all these already, but I'll put two more links in the chat related to physics simulations. This was one done by one of Patty Maz's students in the media lab called Electrostatic Playground, which allowed you to experience magnetism by kind of playing a Pong-like video game where you're bouncing these little electrons around, trying to figure out where the positive and negative ones are. And then that then inspired a follow-on that one of my students did, which open learning was involved in as well, which was called Qubit Arcade, where you could try to understand quantum computing by pretending you were a little qubit running around in some imaginary space.
I think specifically for the goals that we were trying to achieve with the IEP course and then the simulations built for the IEP course, we did choose virtual reality over augmented reality because we wanted our students to have that full sort of immersion. And a big part of that is because specifically with like aerospace subjects, you're learning about airplanes that fly in the air or spacecraft that are in orbit in deep space or on the surface of some planet that we can't visit physically. So simulating those kinds of environments was part of the appeal as to why we wanted to use this sort of technology versus using like a regular 2D simulation on a flat computer screen. So that was definitely something that we considered early on, that we do want this sort of environmental immersion because we believe that it will help draw draw connections between concepts that you learn about specifically like environmental issues that engineers have to design around in these complex spaces, and how that actually looks like in real life.
What are some points and things that you watch for to know where a student may be struggling or where they might need some more help? And like how do you flag that? And then what do you do to address it? And like Molly, from your perspective, having been a student, um, were there times when it became clear you needed help, and like how did you know what kind of help to get given the sort of vast amounts of information and potential resources, I would think. Go ahead.
Yeah, especially since they are relying on each other in this co-creation adventure, and they come from very different backgrounds and skill levels. And it's hard to level set and assume that you know something about the person sitting next to you. Molly was a great example of a type of student we often get who's extremely knowledgeable and motivated and is willing to serve as sort of the ringleader of a small group. We put students into groups to do exercises. So Molly led other classmates on a team. So most students are either in the position of doing what Molly did, coming in with an idea of what they wanted to see built, or just sort of the curious participants who want to go along for someone else's ride. So Molly, you could maybe talk about what it was like to corral a bunch of students who you didn't know and who had different work styles and levels of accountability.
Yeah, I'm kind of touching on the fact that we didn't really know each other before the class. I think a lot of the coordination was student driven. So it was up to really the students in the small groups to reach out to each other. There were in-class prompts and stuff to kind of break the ice and get people more familiar with everyone's backgrounds. For example, Ken mentioned that everyone had to submit like a one-page biography or portfolio basically of what their background was in, what they think that they would want to do in the course, and what their special skills are. And then you could kind of see where everyone else fell based on that sort of portfolio of people. Specifically for my group, we were very, very lucky to have a professional game designer actually in participating in the course. So I learned a lot from him. I did do a lot of the like leadership management stuff, but even then, as a leader, I was still learning from the people in my group, which I think kind of brings back to the uniqueness of the class that everyone is learning from each other still.
The projects that are coming out of this, um, they're built by teams, right? It's not like every single student has their own individual sort of thing at the end of this, or is it a mixture of both?
It is all teams, though. In the
Okay.
spirit of co-creating, if any one of you want to teach me how to take a random group of students and convince them all how to segment off into high performance teams and all agree on what they want to work on for the semester. I've been involved in so many group project classes where the teams are dysfunctional. Half the students don't like the other half of the students or won't show up for the team meetings and they get mad at each other. And I've yet to crack that nut of how to really make really productive student project team classes. So that's probably one frustrations with this. I do try to pressure them all to be in teams and to all collaborate, but it almost never has a 100% success rate. There's always at least one team that winds up kind of flaming out, or they get overly ambitious at the beginning. They're convinced they're going to build everything, and they don't know how to scope it down to bite-sized pieces.
There's no one solution or sets of solutions that's going to work 100% of the time. I mean, every person that comes into the room and every team is going to be unique in a sense, right? I kind of wonder, like, but what are some of the tools or strategies that you found that tend to work better than others in your experience? And even for you, Molly, as someone who was uh, sort of like helping to corral the team along, what are some things that seem to have worked?
And Molly already described this kind of barrage of quick iterations early in the semester. So just get them moving around, both literally and figuratively. Uh, Try different things with different people as many times as possible, and then settle down later into a team project once you've gotten a sense of who your classmates are and who you want to work with. The flip side of that, though, is some students complain of a little bit of exhaustion, that they just want to sit down and work on a serious project for the whole semester. They don't want to keep doing these little made up exercises just to make new friends and then have to switch teams. So I try to find that balance. Yeah, that would be great. And this is exactly why I'm talking to Molly and her colleagues. Ali Dweck is sort of leading the initiative from Aero Astro to up their game in extended reality. They've got a new XR lab over there too, which is a fun space students can work in. So getting us all together to talk about that and see what each department is doing and whether there are special versions of this class that we could run on a given year that have a focus in physics or magnetism. Something I'd love to talk about. And I'll put a couple more links in the chat because we have an alum from MIT who is doing math education in 3D. It's a company called Prisms VR. And actually, several of the students from my class went on to work at that company because their CEO would come and give guest lectures. And then she would recruit the students after they graduate, which was clever on her part. We haven't charged her a recruiter's fee yet, but we have a nice collaboration with them. And then there's a much more grand collaboration with some Hollywood people that were part of the DreamWorks animation studio that decided to pivot into education. And they did a big partnership with Arizona State University. Right now, their flagship class is an intro biology class where you go into this imaginary zoo and play with animals like you're a veterinarian and you learn animal biology by walking around and playing with animals in a virtual space. So a couple of the video game design classes in comparative media studies have started to explore virtual reality. We have a colleague on the faculty named Fox Harrell, who's got a joint appointment between CSAIL and comparative media studies, who looks at sort of some of the social psychology of how people behave in these artificial worlds based on how you represent yourself and your size and gender and race and all these various other attributes and how that changes the way group dynamics work, which is some fascinating work. There are, I mean, lots of simulation programs and computer graphics programs that go on in course 6. But the question of whether we're even going to need all of this fancy computer graphics programming skills, or whether we're just going to speak into a Gen AI chatbot that's going to create the world for us, like on Star Trek, where they just describe the world and it just magically appears and you never have to touch a line of code. This is something we're trying to figure out how we skate toward.
Thank you all for coming, and hopefully see you in a future xTalk. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Molly, for coming out here to share with us your work.